If shooting in manual mode still feels like you're just pressing buttons and turning dials, hoping that you'll get your settings correct this time, you're not doing it wrong, you just haven't been given the right starting point yet. There's no magic formula for perfect camera settings, but there is a logical thought process that will get you out of guessing mode and into confident mode a lot faster. And that's exactly what I'm covering in this video. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear, simple thought process for setting up your camera in any situation, so you're not starting from zero every time you pick it up. There's no memorizing rules and there's no rigid recipes, so you're just moving in a certain direction. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Karen. I taught myself photography and I built a 13-year portrait business, and I'm here to help make photography so much less complicated to learn. And if you want a real shortcut to confident settings, my free guide, Shoot Like a Pro, gives you starting point ranges for the situations you'll actually shoot in most. The link is below and it's completely free. But first, let me tell you about the exposure police, because I was terrified of them for years, and they absolutely do not exist. This sounds really silly, but when I was starting out, I felt like there was some sort of exposure police that were lurking in the shadows, waiting to pop out after every shot that I took and say, "You did it wrong, you need to correct your settings, everything is incorrect here." But of course that never happened, so it was just me, all by myself, taking all these photos that I really wasn't happy with. Because at the time, I was chasing perfection in my photography. I felt like I had to know everything about the exposure triangle and that I needed to get perfect settings, and while I was chasing perfection, I couldn't even define what perfect meant. But later I came to realize that photography is art, and art is subjective, and nobody ever really pointed that out well enough to me. So when I stopped waiting for somebody to come say, "Hey, you did everything right," that's when everything started to shift for me, and that's when I started to enjoy taking photos for what it was. Manual mode was really difficult for me when I started out, and learning the exposure triangle felt like driving a car and not knowing where the brake or the gas are located, and surprise, it's a stick shift and there's a clutch in there somewhere, so good luck to you. So I got there most of the time, but it wasn't a smooth ride by any means. When I would take photos, I would look at them and think there were some things that were right about them, but I realized that there were things wrong with them, but I really couldn't tell you what they were. But I'd take the shots anyway. And that's the part that I got right. Missing a shot because you feel like you're not going to do it correctly is missing the entire point of shooting in the first place. Whenever I'd go online and try to find settings that I was supposed to use for my images to make them perfect, I would find all these recipes and they would tell you exactly what settings they use to get a certain photo, and that's what you're supposed to do to yours, right? To get something really similar? But the problem was they never worked, and so I started losing confidence in these recipes because there were so many other variables that weren't accounted for. My lighting was completely different from their lighting perhaps, or maybe my subject was in a different location, and there were so many different variables, it just felt like they weren't working for me, and I stopped using them. And there's also the aspect of creativity. What I wanted to do with my photo versus what they were doing with their photo might be completely different. And so the recipes weren't wrong, it's just that my expectations about them were wrong. So starting out with recipes and getting specific settings, they're really just a starting point, because you're always going to have different lighting or different elements to your scene that aren't in that scene that you have to account for. And that's not failure, that's just how photography works. So what I really needed to do was just set it up with the settings that were given to me in that recipe, and then take my test shot and observe what I see on my camera and adjust whatever settings need to be adjusted, and then take another shot and repeat until you get the image that you're trying to get. I also have a confession to make. I used to chronically underexpose my images because when I was starting out, I ended up overexposing everything and making them look like I shot them off the surface of the sun. And I was afraid of ruining more photos, so I ended up underexposing the majority of everything going forward. I told myself I could just fix it in editing and it wouldn't be a big deal. And then there was the whole mental spiral that went along with this. I wondered, are they going to print their images? Because when you print them out, they turn out a lot darker. And then what if their screen isn't calibrated? And what if they're looking on a phone? And what if their brightness is at 50%? There were all these variables and they would drive me crazy, and it made it really hard to know what is this perfect exposure, because there's a lot of stuff that I can't control here. And where do I fall with taking the photo and making sure that it's the best that it can be, considering all those other things? And the funny part is nobody else was thinking about those types of things. So this was completely self-inflicted torture. But lucky for me, I eventually discovered that there is an exposure meter inside your camera. And it's not perfect, but it gives you some idea of whether or not your photo is going to be properly exposed. So when you have your settings the way that you want them, you simply press down your shutter button halfway, and the exposure meter is just going to tell you if you're in the ballpark of correct exposure. And again, it's not perfect, but if you're wildly off, it's going to let you know. Generally, I do use this to give me an idea of if I'm going to be exposed properly or not. And then if there is anything that needs adjusting, I just do a little bit of light editing afterwards. So what is the actual thought process going through your mind when you're setting up your camera settings for manual mode? Well, what usually works for me is setting my white balance first. And based on where I'm shooting, I try to choose the closest white balance to that situation. But what I don't typically do is set my white balance to auto. I have been burnt by that in the past, and I would rather just set it to the correct situation that I'm in. And the second step is simply deciding what's your goal of the photo. So before I touch any other settings, I decide, do I want to have a portrait with that beautiful blurry background so my subject stands apart from it? If that's the case, I like to choose aperture as my first setting. And I will usually set my aperture to anywhere between f2.8 and 5.6, depending on how many subjects that I have in front of me. And if the goal of the shot is to capture motion or blur it creatively, then shutter speed is usually the thing that I choose next. I will usually set my shutter speed to 1/200, but if my subjects are moving around a lot more, then I'll typically use a higher shutter speed than that. And the last thing that I do is I set my ISO, because if I've selected my aperture and shutter speed the way that I want it, and if I'm checking my exposure based on my exposure meter and it indicates that it's still a little bit too dark, I'm gonna bump up my ISO. And I typically do start my ISO at 100 or keep it as low as possible. So that's the whole system. It's not a formula, it's just a direction to go in when you're trying to choose your settings. First off, set the white balance, then choose your aperture or shutter speed, then choose the other, either aperture or shutter speed, then choose your ISO last. I want to mention too that there's no shame in using partial manual modes such as aperture priority or shutter priority. If things are moving fast and you just need to get the shot, it's completely acceptable to use these modes. Nobody's ever going to come and stop you and say, I know exactly what mode you were using when you shot that photo. It's kind of like when you're eating a plate of rice. Your stomach really doesn't know the difference if you're using chopsticks or a fork. So if you get the same results with less stress by using a fork, then why torture yourself? So when it comes to taking your photos, just get the shot first and you can refine your process over time. And being confident shooting in manual mode doesn't come from memorizing rules, it comes from repetition. And here's the thing, you will still guess sometimes. I still guess from time to time after shooting hundreds of thousands of images over the years. But the difference now is that it doesn't feel so catastrophic when I don't get my settings right, because I know I can check my shot, change the settings if I need to, and shoot it again. Getting close enough and needing to fix a few little things in editing is always better than missing the shot because you didn't have your settings exactly perfect. If I think back to the person that I was when I first started shooting, I would tell myself, you actually don't need to stress about any of this stuff because it's a really creative process and there's a lot of leeway in it. And I think my younger self would be surprised to know that I did whatever I felt like I wanted to and needed to get the shots over the years. And clients still paid me every single session. So enjoy the fact that there is a lot of leeway with photography and your settings and how you capture things and what your end shot looks like. I wish somebody had really told me that when I was starting out. So you don't need perfect settings. You just need a starting point and a direction to move in and get in enough repetitions that your hands know where to go with all of your dials and settings before your brain has a moment to catch up. The exposure police are not coming. It is just you and your camera and the shots that you want to take. So start there. Don't forget, my free guide, Shoot Like a Pro, is linked below. It includes real starting points for real situations that you're going to shoot in. So you're not building from zero every time. Go grab it and then go take some shots. And if you're still watching, leave me a comment below and tell me which setting you guess on the most, aperture, shutter speed, or ISO. And I'll see you next time.